welcome everybody. We have as our guest someone from, we'll just say from Europe, Elsa, who is kind of self-identified, psychopathic seeming. I would say she's hyper-rational. I would say that she is very technically minded. I would say that she is unemotional. And it's kind of funny, I'm saying all these things because she said that, you know, if you're asking me questions, make sure that they're specific, because I have a little bit of a hard time answering questions about myself, right? And this was after we kind of had like a lot of debate, and maybe we'll get into it today, but a lot of debate about what exactly is the self, and about like psychopathic sense of self, how it might differ from other people, which I think is like a major thing. And she thinks, you know, maybe a solid maybe on this, right? So do you have anything? Oh, I remember we were going to start with our first topic, stuff in the news. But first, let's hear about, you don't have to say specifically like what country, but maybe just a little bit about the way that your country is handling things with coronavirus. And do you feel good about it or not good about it, and why?
First of all, hi everyone. Yeah, actually, I think my country is handling the corona virus crisis pretty well. So yeah, we are on lockdown, and there are a lot of restrictions, like like a lot of shops are closed and stuff. But right now, actually, we're starting to reopen like everything again. Like now you can go into shops, but you have to wear a mask all the time when you're using public transportation, or when you're going to stores. Yeah, and I actually think it's going quite well. Our hospitals, there are like enough beds left for people who are going to need it maybe. And so, yeah, compared to, for example, the US, I think I'm pretty glad to live here.
Yes, I
Yeah.
was just looking at it was kind of a tweet thread. Somebody was returning back home to Hong Kong. I think they were in France is where they had been, and then they were like, I'm going to spend the rest of lockdown or whatever, like I'm just going to go back home. I think they're a journalist is why they were in France. And she walked us through like all the like different steps and stages, including she was like in there, I think it's like a convention center that's right next to the airport or something. And they had to spend basically 9 hours there while they were tested for coronavirus. So they either had to, I think they had to do both. I think they had to do 2 weeks quarantine and the testing, or maybe it was just one of them. And I was like, man, people are flying into our airports in the United States without any sort of anything, I think. Like even my sister who lives in Singapore, she's coming home for the summer. And she's like, you know, do I have a quarantine? Like if I come in, do we have to be quarantined someplace for 2 weeks? And I was like, I don't think so. You know, I have not heard anything about that. I mean, it's obviously very intelligent to run your country that way, but that's just not what's happening here.
Right.
So also on the call, we have Arya. Arya is from our last call. She is my boo. Maybe I will call her Baba sometimes because that is my pet name for her. All right. So the other stuff in the news is killing babies. So there are two tweets. I'll try to remember to post them when I post this video. But one of them is talking about how there is this guy who he had a domestic violence dispute. I think he either he stabbed his wife, and he took his 1-year-old. His name is Adam Slater. You can Google him. He then got into a wreck when fleeing the scene with his 1-year-old. A bystander tried to save his 1-year-old out of the wrecked car, and Adam stabbed the bystander. Adam then threw his 1-year-old baby off a cliff to die, right? So he says evil exists to that. And then I'm like reading my tweet, and I see like maybe even that same day, it was just like hours later, right? I see like another tweet where somebody says at dispatcher Dame, D-A-M-E. It's they're saying breaking after the pursuit suspect emerged from the car with a young child in his arms. Officers were able to talk him into giving them the child. So basically the same situation is what it ends up being with dispatcher Dame. She she kind of gave me some more information afterwards. He was wanted for felony domestic violence where he left with the child, so basically same as Adam Slater. Then in the course of leaving, also assaulted an officer with a deadly weapon. Now here I'm like reading between the lines. When you say assaulted an officer with a deadly weapon, then rather than saying a gun or a knife, it means it's not a gun or a knife. It's like a screwdriver or something, you know? So
Yeah, whatever they had on hand.
yes, exactly. Could have been what was ever in the back seat or something. It's not a baseball bat, you know, it's not like one of these scary things. It's like something that could be deadly if you like stab them in the eye or something with it, you know. So then she says he led officers on a pursuit through the Southland with a child not in a car seat. Dun dun dun. And you want to defend him and say he's not scum, because here's what I said in reply to her saying that this guy is scum, because he does hand over the baby. Unlike Adam, he doesn't throw the baby over the cliff, right? So I say everybody can make a right choice no matter what they've done in the past. It doesn't diminish the rightness of a choice that you've made terrible mistakes before. You can start over in a moment. This man was right to hand over the child. For all we know, he may no longer be scum. And when you watch the video, he really is like, okay, I'm going to hand over the baby, and totally gives up, puts his hands up, becomes completely cooperative after this whole thing. And this dispatcher Dame, we kind of argue about it a little bit, right? She's saying, you know, he did all these bad things. He's still scum. He's always going to be scum, basically. And I'm like, well, okay, if that's kind of your perspective, is that somebody's still going to be scum just because they made certain mistakes in their past, then what is the incentive to hand over the baby rather than throw the baby over the cliff? You know, like you have to have kind of this view that people are pretty dynamic and that they can change, and they can change in a moment, right? Because otherwise, why would people even reform in prison? You know, if that's your idea that people are just scum, then why send them to prison for 10 years? They're just going to get out and then be scum when they come out. You know, it's like, it's a really kind of a depressing view of humanity. You know, like there is a difference between Adam and this other guy. You know, there's a difference between handing the baby over to the cops, and there's a difference between like throwing the baby over the cliff, I think. And I think you should acknowledge it, you know, and say this person was right to hand over the baby. That was a good decision. And then Elsa, when I told her that that's what we're going to talk about, she said, but fun fact, you can kill a newborn baby with just 1 tablespoon of normal salt. But she did say that was just reportedly from one of her coworkers. That was what was going on. So there you go. I assume that it's you. How do you kill the baby? I assume it's you just give the baby just 1 tablespoon of salt, and their body can't handle that much salt content. Is that your understanding, Elsa?
Yeah, I think that's how it works. I mean, first you have to give like the salt to the baby and make it like swallow it. But I mean, I don't know. I never tried it, so I have no idea if this is like a true thing and if this actually works. But I don't know. I think, I mean, that baby is pretty tiny and has not that much water in it. So I don't know, if you give it like a tablespoon of salt, maybe that's enough to like kill it. Yeah.
Speaking of salt content, I think it's because my dad used to read like science fiction books all the time. So I would read these old like 60s, like 1950s style science fiction books too sometimes. And they were always talking about like peeing and then drinking your pee, you know, like you're stuck on Mars, right? It's ridiculous because you're stuck on Mars, right? And their understanding of Mars is so limited. They're basically, you know, people are able to survive on Mars, but for the water issue in which you have to like drink your pee. That was like the science fiction level of it. Do you know anything about drinking your pee, Elsa?
I don't know, but are you sure that they like really said like they literally drink their pee? Maybe they meant like something, you know, like they process the pee and then they, you know, like separate all the chemicals and stuff, so they get out the water. So you're basically drinking your pee, but you actually only drinking water. So I don't know, maybe this is what they meant and they just didn't write it that way or that smart.
Yes, I would totally do both, by the way. And I think when they're living in the colonies in Mars, yes, that's how it happens. But when they get lost on Mars, they get like somehow separated from the rest of their people and they have to survive for like a month outside of their colony. That's when the drinking the pee happens.
Yeah, I think they get like other problems first. Like,
Yes.
I don't know, running out of oxygen or something like that, or battery for their spacesuit or something. I think like drinking your pee or drinking at all is the least of your problems then, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, so I grew up kind of obsessed though with like drinking my pee because I was like, all right, this is what we have to do if we're
means of
ever in
survival.
trouble.
Have you ever tried it?
I have not tried it, you know. I probably would though. Maybe I will on the next Zoom. I would probably super hydrate before though, because some of my
Yeah.
pee is really dark, you know, shouldn't be, you know, but obviously
And hot.
sometimes it is. Yep. Arya knows that it's quite hot, unusually hot, I think. All right, so we already, okay, do you have, can you tell us a little bit about why you self-identify as a psychopath or sociopath though, Elsa?
Well, I like one day I just read something about that topic on the internet, and I just read the stuff because I was curious, and I thought like, wow, that's an interesting topic. But then I just like saw myself and all the descriptions, and obviously I didn't read all these like, oh yeah, my husband is an evil psychopath sites, but like the more better sources. And yeah, I kind of saw myself in that, and then I did more research, and then it was suddenly like like I was missing a very important piece of a puzzle, like a piece in the middle. And then when I got all this information and read about it, and then suddenly so much things in my life fitted, and yeah, it was just like I found like this very important piece of a puzzle, and to see the whole picture. So yeah.
And then do you have one funny sociopath story?
Actually, no, I don't have. I don't know what you mean with like a funny story.
Probably the funny one already is when you were like debating me about the self, and then you're like, but don't only ask me specific questions about a self. It's hard for you to answer questions. Well, how about that one? So like, how have you realized that it's hard for you to answer? Is it like in personality tests or something that you've taken where you're like, these questions are actually hard?
No, it's just more like, if I'm like, sometimes you have like, I don't know, in school or whenever you come to like a new like group building activity, and then they say, okay, now everyone should introduce themselves and say something about yourself. And then like people say, oh yeah, my name is and I'm like really good at sports and I love doing that. And I'm just like sitting there and waiting until it's my turn and trying to come up with something like, I don't know, like something, because it's like, what the fuck should I say? It's like there is so much I could say, and I don't know what like people expect me to say or want me to say or what I want to say. So yeah, I just don't like that. I mean, if the question is phrased differently and they say like, yeah, now tell me what is your favorite sports or music or something like that, then it's like easier, because then at least I know in what direction I need to find something. Yeah.
That's funny that you do that, because I teach, I've taught like off and on like various things, and this is like for legal practitioners, right? Not in law school, just like legal practitioner people. And I started doing that. But I've been doing this, I think maybe even like when I taught law school, like I have 5 questions. 1, your name. 2, where are you from? Sometimes I say like, are you from this area or not? Right. And then 3, what's your favorite color? 4 is like, what's your interest in law? And 5, like, what is your background in law? Because I also am kind of like, if somebody wants to talk more about themselves or answer different questions, and I say those questions are all optional, but if you want to just stick to those. And so I feel like it's funny that I even do that same thing, because I'm like, I don't want to just ask them about themselves. Like, what a weird question. It doesn't make sense. I think even for me to ask the question about like, just tell me about yourself. So that's kind of funny. All right. 3, we're on the step of article discussion. So I posted this article in the Sociopath World post, and I'll try to remember to post this in the YouTube video too, in the information. So Elsa has spent some time in China. And so the article is a Slate article that's kind of talking about this, let's say, phenomenon that happens in China, where if you accidentally hit a pedestrian, drivers will like go over the pedestrian multiple times, like back up, drive forward, back up, drive forward, like keep running the person over because they're trying to, can you guys guess it? Yes, they're trying to kill the pedestrian. So the person who's writing the article is a China law expert, and he is essentially saying that it's much cheaper to kill the person because then you're only spending maybe like a burial cost of like $40,000 tops. But if you don't kill the person, then you have to pay for their care for the rest of their life. So that's kind of the distinction there. And so there is kind of an economic incentive. But do you want to tell us a little bit about China, Elsa?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I lived in China for some time, and first of all, I have to say it's like a really amazing country, and I really like it. It's really awesome to live there, but there are some weird things. Like, for example, one day I was going home by taxi, and then we were like on the highway, and like then suddenly like there was getting more traffic, and so we had to slow down. And on one lane there was just lying this dead body, and you know, people had like put a like covered him up, but only like, you know, the piece of cloth was like way too small, so you still could see his legs and his feet. And I don't know, no one was stopping, like everyone was just driving by. There was no police there, no ambulance. And I was asking my driver, like, yeah, what's going on? And he said, oh yeah, that's kind of normal. And yeah, apparently no one stopped, and no one, I mean, obviously this guy was dead, but still no one stopped, and no one like took care of his body and so on. So yeah, I think this is like a really weird thing. This is also why I like researched like this Chinese accidents and like car crashes a little bit, because I was just like confused. And yeah, I mean, this would never happen somewhere in Europe or the US, I guess.
Yeah, thank you
So,
for also including the US on that one.
I
So,
think I
yes,
think like
yeah,
that.
you think so. We never did see. So, like, Elsa, along with Arthur, also went on this van trip with us. It was like maybe, I think you were with us for like 2.5 weeks. You came a little bit late on the scene or something, but we never did see dead bodies while we were driving around. And I actually have only seen once, and that
Yeah.
is the past year with Arya. Saw like a dead body on the side of the highway, and it was weird because the car was pulled over, and then there was like the dead body, and then there was just like this like orange kind of tarp over it. And I was like, this must have just happened or something, but where are the cops? And like, where did this little, was it an orange tarp? There was something over his face, right?
Yeah. It was like an orange tarp over his face on the side of the road.
So
And you could
somebody
still see
must
his
have,
feet peeking out.
yes, yeah, his feet. So it's like there's clearly a dead body there, but he probably was
Yeah.
only there for like 5-10 minutes or something. It wasn't like the way you're describing it is like almost if I had a ladder in the back of my truck or something and it fell off on the freeway. Sometimes this happens, you know, something falls out and then everybody just goes around it like a big cardboard box or something. Everybody just goes around it, but nobody stops to get it, you know. So I remember hearing about this thing with China, them like running over people. I think it was in law school. So this was like early 2000s, mid 2000s. And I saw like a video. This was like kind of at the beginning of the internet, you know, like at first the internet was mostly just like library catalogs, it seemed like. But then you started getting these weird kind of like quirky news stories. And there was a toddler who got hit by a truck. And the Slate article even mentions it, got hit by a truck, and the toddler, like who knows how, actually got up afterwards and like started walking away, but then the truck still like went back and ran him over, maybe because they didn't even like want to, you know, get out. And that was kind of something that was interesting about the Slate article, is that yes, you can be charged with murder for these situations, but what most of these drivers do is say, hey, I thought it was just like a cardboard box or something. Like I didn't realize it was a human being that I was running over. I thought maybe it was just like a bag of rubbish in the street that I was running over. So I think like it's worse for you to get out and look and see, you know, what it was, because then that like kind of ruins
That's
your
an
plausible.
admission that, you know, it's a
Yes,
child.
plausible deniability. Yeah, so it's really kind of an interesting article. You said that you really liked China, though, Elsa. Like, what are some of the things you like in terms of like living there?
Okay, first of all, living there as like not non-Chinese person, you know, it's pretty great because everything is so cheap. So, yeah, you have a pretty nice standard of living,
Uh-huh.
and also
Hmm.
I really like the people. I mean, it's like a completely different culture, and like a lot of things are, yeah, different. Like, for example, when you go to a restaurant and the way people eat is like, yeah, like not like you would eat, like people would eat in a restaurant in Europe. And but you know, I think I'm pretty good at adapting to, you know, new situations. So this didn't matter to me. So for me, it was okay. I just, you know, adapted, and I just did what everyone there did. And so I had a pretty nice time. And yeah, so if you actually, yeah, try to understand the way of living there, and if you do everything Chinese people do too, then yeah, it's just awesome.
So, were there people that you were with, kind of like other Europeans or non-Chinese people, who had a harder time adapting, I guess, to this Chinese way of life?
Yeah, there were like some people I met who said like, yeah, they 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 wished they had like some European food, and they had like this. I don't know. I never actually got this concept. It's like this. I don't know if you call it like that too, like culture shock, like cultural shock. If
Hmm.
you're going somewhere and then you're like so shocked by all the impressions and experiences that you're like, I don't know, shut off. I don't know. I don't know. I I can't um, yeah, describe what it is, because I think I never experienced it. And I also don't understand people who say, oh, I have like this shock because everything is too much, this whole culture, everything is new. So yeah, but I know people who just, yeah, who said they had that.
Yeah. So, do you think that there, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before, and maybe we'll keep kind of talking about it because I think it's an interesting topic. But do you think like why would people experience this culture shock? You know, like what about them that is different from you that would they would feel the culture shock and not you?
Um, yeah, I actually have no idea. I think I'm just good at, you know, adapting to new situations, because I'm not, maybe this is the whole like, you know, sense of self
Yes.
debate.
This is like after we've exchanged a bunch of emails. Yeah, so could be this whole sense of self. Could be that you're more open-minded. And I absolutely think that this is kind of a thing that I talked with Arthur about a lot. And it's going in the next book, is like I think that psychopaths score really high on openness when we talk about the 5-factor traits, the main like personality traits in psychology. Openness is one of them, right? And I think that, I mean, I would be really hard pressed to find a psychopath, sociopathic minded person who is low in openness. Like, have you ever met anyone like that, Arya or Elsa, who's like kind of psychopathically minded but low openness?
I don't think so.
No,
Yeah.
no.
So I'm kind of like, you know, like, and I'll just go ahead and state my theory here because I don't think I've like ever stated it before, and we have a little bit of time. So my basic theory is like personality disorders are all, you know, they all have, everybody with a personality disorder has an issue with their personality, right? What does it mean, a personality? It's kind of like an identity, or I say sense of self, you know, like your understanding of your own self, right? There are different ways that you can use it, and I think each word is like slightly not as accurate, right? And so that's some of the debates that we were having, Elsa and I were having earlier in the email, is to say like self is kind of a loaded term, right? Because it comes with all of this like philosophical, you know, like, you know, I think therefore I am, you know, that type of stuff. And it also has like this neuroscience, which is basically saying, you know, do we have any sort of sense of self at all? Do we have any sort of identity at all? Or are we all just kind of like making it up? And do you want to kind of describe a little bit some of that science? I mean, just like in a sentence or two, Elsa?
Yeah, I can try to explain that like very short. So it's kind of like, you know, when you like, first of all, if you like look around you, your visual world, you know, seems like really unbroken and, you know, like fluent. But in reality, your visual world is like blacked out, you know, between your eye movements and because your brain is just cutting out these blurred images, which you of course see because your eyes, you know, like you have like these blind spots, and then your peripheral view is like you know, kind of impaired and actually blurred, but the brain makes up for this imperfections. And yeah, like scientists think that this deception also exists for the self too, so that it's actually like, you know, constructed every time, every new situation, and that our brain just kind of constructs a model of the external world by yeah, making a story out of the experiences we have, so that we can, you know, predict what we're going to do next and so on.
Right. So, and then maybe we can even try to find a link for this, but you guys could probably Google it, where there,
Also, wait, I
yeah,
have
that,
this from this
yes,
book. It's called The Self-Illusion by Bruce Hood, just like, you know, to give the sources here. It's not
yeah.
my own thoughts, and yeah,
So yeah, The Self-Illusion by Bruce Hood. And he kind this like visual thing, right? I've seen it before where if you like look at one area, the circle's actually broken, right? But if you look at one point of the circle, then the circle looks like it's a full circle, like it's an unbroken circle, right? So like this idea that our brain is kind of tricking us all the time is, you know, shouldn't be that unusual. It's kind of like our phones now that they're like fancy, you know, that our hands are jerking like while we're trying to take a photo, but the video doesn't come out jerky, right? They have all these like smoothing technologies. So that's kind of like what the brain is doing. So there might be like, why do you think that the brain evolutionarily, why do you think the brain goes to this step of like actually saying, okay, let's develop a sense of self? Does anyone have an idea? Elsa, Arya?
well, I just think, you know, like it makes sense from an evolutionary point, because you kind of, you know, you have to interact with your world, and you have to survive. And, you know, if you had to process all these information in your brain, you know, like piece by piece, then it would be too much information and it would be like really inefficient. But like with your brain and with your also like kind of the constructed sense of self, you can get like shortcuts, so it's easier to live, and it doesn't, you know, like kind of take too much like power. Yeah, it's more efficient. I think this is like how this whole thing developed.
Yeah, and that makes total sense to me. You know, I have heard before that emotions, the theory that emotions are kind of like this evolutionary advantage, right? Like emotions also kind of like are shortcuts, right? Like don't do this thing, you're afraid of rats because you know you have a phobia of rats, which even my niece does. She's like 1 year old, but she hates rats. She loves animals, but like hates any
You
sort
were
of
afraid
rodent.
of rats, right?
I was also afraid of rats. Yeah, so I also had like a phobia.
I don't know if rats is the best example. I think you should rather say like spiders or snakes, because this is like, I think there's also like a lot of research on that, like that most people have like this innate fear of snakes and spiders, because this was something, you know, back then when you saw like a spider or a snake, you had to react so fast that you could like survive. So I don't
Yes.
know if like the thing with rats is like really like also like that innate, but yeah, could be.
Yeah. So yeah, that, and you can imagine all sorts of other emotions, right? You like love the people that are part of your tribe, maybe you hate the people that are your enemies, and it just makes doing certain things easier. that tend to be like evolutionarily advantageous. Like, don't hurt the people in your own tribe, but if necessary, it's okay to hurt the people outside your tribe, right? And we're kind of seeing people talk all of the time nowadays about tribalism and how terrible that is for, like, you know, the global, you know, society, because we're like at odds against each other, and it kind of doesn't make sense. Like, there are a lot of instances, same thing with our eating, right? Like, we're evolutionary kind of trained to like sugar and fatty foods, and that's not good for our bodies anymore now that that food is so abundant, right? So yeah, so I think this is interesting because, like, I think even this is interesting. Like, even if the self is constructed, like, why is it constructed? Like, you would assume that there's some sort of advantage to having kind of this sense of self. But we can also illustrate in all sorts of different ways that it's a disadvantage, right? You say, for instance, that the people, this is kind of, you know, you didn't say this, but you thought that maybe I would think this, but that the people who are experiencing culture shock are probably people with a stronger sense of self. One time my literary agent asked me, she said, do you feel nostalgia when you have certain smells? And I was like, no. Do you guys feel nostalgia when you have certain smells? Like the smell of, like, yeah, nothing,
Nostalgia
right?
is still something that I would have to look up a dictionary definition of.
Yes. And I feel like there's something about that. You know, I kind of describe it in this way, weak sense of self, but this is kind of what I'm like trying to describe. And maybe there are better terms, and maybe I'm going to like learn the better terms, but this is what I mean. Like, it's difficult for us to answer questions about ourselves. We do not feel so tied to our culture or our family. Like, I don't even feel tied to my family, my religion. I don't even feel tied to my gender. I don't feel that tied to my ethnicity, to my age, to like all of these like kind of like things that people would automatically look at me and be like, okay, you know, XXXXX, she like checks all these boxes. Like, I don't feel any sort of emotional attachment or any real attachment at all to those concepts. I think that they're just basically arbitrary distinctions. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right with that. I mean, yeah, I also don't like, you know, have like a strong connection to like all of these things. And yeah, this is why I'm also having a hard time to describe myself when people ask me, yeah, tell me something about yourself. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we
Arya?
were talking about it the other night. Even though I'm in a relationship with another woman, right? I don't necessarily think I'm in a gay relationship, right? But yet people ask me all these questions, alluding to what it's like to be in a gay relationship, right? And I still feel like I don't know how to answer them.
And if somebody were to say like to say that like you are a lesbian, would you be like, oh, yep, that identifies me? I feel like that is an accurate label.
I'm neither here nor there, you know. I just let people think whatever, you know. I like, it doesn't really offend me, and I don't feel the need to correct them, you know. But there is, you know, I think there's a little bit of a compulsion to correct them, yet I wouldn't know how to correct them. You know, what is the right answer? So I'm like, okay, you think what you think.
Yes, I think it, even talking about this and being like, hey, you know, what word should we use to describe this phenomenon? Is it self? Is it identity? Is it personality? Is it something? But what's kind of going on, like getting back to my theory, is that like the different personality disorders have like different kind of issues with the self, right? For instance, like I think it's pretty common knowledge that narcissistic personality disorder, they have a false self that they present to the public. And the false self is perfect and the best and, you know, does everything great and that has like no faults, right? So that's the false sense. And then in the inner self, right? And I have like a narcissistic leaning, let's say, father, right? So I see it even in his old age. In fact, it's getting like worse. He thinks that he's like thin, attractive, good looking. The reality is he looks like a weird Papa Smurf, you know, like just kind of like a crazy guy. He looks totally crazy all the time. There's no way that anyone would even like guess his age correctly, I think, because he just looks like this weird thing. But he thinks he's muscular. He thinks he's fit. He's not fit at all. You
not
know?
at risk for the coronavirus at all.
Yeah. So
even though he's the perfect host.
Yeah, so he has like this kind of deception going on, but sometimes he has moments of where he feels intense shame. internal shame. And this is kind of something that we're going to get to. We only have 2 minutes, so let's touch on this like idea of guilt and shame really quick. But let me finish though. So a psychopath though, like a psychopath doesn't have those types of feelings, that false sense. A psychopath just has basically like a very weak sense of their own self, a weak sense of their own personality, a very weak sense of their own identity. And so that's why they're able, I think, this is kind of my theory, that's why they're like a chameleon. That's why they have a difficult time describing themselves. That's why it's really easy for them to violate moral boundaries, because they don't experience guilt. And the way that I kind of define guilt, and Elsa and I looked it up, and there's not like a really set definition. There's like a debate about like what the emotions guilt and shame mean, and if there is a difference at all, what the difference is. And so guilt in my conception is you have violated something, your internal conception. Like, let's say I think I'm an honest person, and then let's say I don't tell the truth. I have violated that, so I would experience guilt. And in fact, there is a study that was mentioned in one of the articles that Elsa sent to me that it says, you know, when people are more likely to cheat when they think of it as just cheating versus when they think of it as them being a cheater. Like, they don't want to be seen as a cheater, but they are willing to cheat, you know, this identity versus the action thing. We actually only have like 30 seconds. So let's just wrap it up. Does anyone have any other thoughts on this?
I don't know. I think you summarized it pretty well.
Okay. And maybe we'll like pick up, we'll try to invite Elsa back when we have a little bit more audience participation. I messed up the time on that, so I apologize. But we'll try to get Elsa back and maybe talk a little bit more about this. Thank you, Elsa, for coming. It was great talking with you. I hope everything's going well with you and your family, and we'll see everybody probably next week.
Bye, Elsa.
Thank you. Bye.